The neon sign of the crowded lounge buzzed with a low, rhythmic hum, casting a warm amber glow over the patrons who gathered to unwind after a long week of work. It was a Friday evening, a time when the city seemed to exhale collectively, shifting its focus from corporate spreadsheets to the pursuit of companionship and relaxation. Inside the bustling establishment, the atmosphere was thick with the murmur of casual conversations, the occasional burst of light-hearted laughter, and the distinctive clinking of ice cubes against glass. Behind the polished mahogany bar, a seasoned bartender named Alf moved with practiced efficiency. His hands were a blur of motion as he wiped down the counter, poured drinks, and kept a watchful eye on the room. He knew the regulars, he knew the drifters, and more importantly, he knew the subtle rhythms of the local singles scene. To his left, leaning against the bar with an air of casual confidence, was a man known to the crowd as Jack. Jack was a handsome gentleman in his mid-30s, possessing light brown hair that was perfectly styled, an easy smile, and a small, barely noticeable scar on his chin that somehow added to his rugged charm. He was a man who possessed an uncanny ability to blend into any environment, projecting whatever persona the situation required. Jack took a slow sip of his drink and leaned in closer to the bartender, his eyes scanning the room before locking onto a specific target. He gestured subtly toward a corner booth where a young woman sat alone, nursing a drink and looking somewhat detached from the surrounding revelry. "Tell me about the girl in the corner booth," Jack murmured, his voice smooth and laced with curiosity. Alf followed the direction of Jack's gaze and nodded knowingly as he picked up a fresh glass to polish. "That is Luella," Alf replied in a quiet tone. "She comes in a lot. She works in one of the mail rooms upstairs." Jack evaluated the information for a brief second before making a slight, dismissive motion with his hand. "Pass," he said simply, his eyes already drifting away from the corner booth to search for a more promising prospect. He did not have to wait long. His gaze swept across the lounge and came to a halt when he noticed a striking young woman sitting near the center of the room. She possessed an air of intelligence and quiet sophistication that immediately set her apart from the more boisterous patrons. Jack turned back to Alf, a sharp glint of interest in his eyes. "Check that out," Jack said, nodding toward the new target. "There is a live one. Swimsuits? She models them, right?" Alf chuckled softly, adjusting his apron as he looked over at the woman. "Clothes," the bartender answered with a knowing grin. "Lingerie. You sure know how to size them up, Jack." Jack smiled, a look of satisfaction washing over his features. "What about her? Does she come in often?" "She drops in mostly on Fridays," Alf explained, leaning over the bar to deliver the information in a confidential manner. "She is with the big pharmaceutical house. You know, the one that handles major medical supplies and prescription drugs." Jack nodded slowly, digesting the valuable piece of information. "Alf, you are a veritable fount of information," he said, his tone filled with genuine amusement. "Thanks. You have clever hands, too." "Thank you, Jack," Alf replied, accepting the compliment with a nod before moving down the bar to attend to another customer. Left to his own devices, Jack picked up his glass and began to make his way through the crowded room, navigating the sea of patrons with the grace of a seasoned performer. He approached the table where the young woman sat, his expression transforming into one of warm, harmless charm. He caught her eye and offered a polite, gentle smile. "Honey, how about a refill of scotch and water?" Jack asked softly, gesturing to her nearly empty glass. The young woman looked up, slightly startled by the sudden approach, but visibly disarmed by his pleasant demeanor. Before she could answer, Jack pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, his movements smooth and natural. "Make that a match set," Jack continued, signaling to a passing waitress. "I was just about to go," the young woman said, her voice hesitant but not entirely unwelcoming. "Now you cannot go," Jack insisted with a playful twinkle in his eye. "You have not finished your drink yet." "I am Jack. Who are you?" The young woman hesitated for a fraction of a second, looking into his warm eyes before a soft smile broke across her face. The tension in her shoulders seemed to melt away. "That is much better," Jack noted approvingly. "Cigarette?" "No, thanks," she replied, declining the offer with a gentle wave of her hand. "You come here often?" Jack asked, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table to create a sense of intimacy. "No, not usually," she admitted, looking around the lounge before returning her attention to him. "How about yourself?" "Almost never." Jack lied effortlessly, his voice dripping with sincerity. At that moment, the waitress arrived with the fresh drinks. Jack reached into his pocket, pulled out some money, and handed it to the waitress along with a check. "Here, keep the check," he said generously. "Thank you, sir," the waitress murmured before slipping back into the crowd. Suddenly, Jack paused, looking down at his watch as if a sudden realization had just struck him. He snapped his fingers softly. "I just remembered something," he said, looking at the young woman with a face full of polite regret. "I have an important business phone call to make. It is only going to take me a few minutes. Now you wait here, okay? Otherwise they're going to rip off my scotch." The young woman laughed softly, charmed by his protective attitude over the beverages. "I shall guard it bravely," she promised. "I will be right back," Jack said, rising from his seat and offering her one last reassuring smile before turning and walking toward the quieter hallway near the back of the establishment where the public telephones were located. As Jack stepped into the dimly lit hallway, his mind was already calculating the steps needed to secure his new target. However, his thoughts were abruptly shattered when a frantic voice echoed from behind him. "Frank!" Jack froze for a fraction of a second, his muscles tensing before he quickly composed his features and turned around. Standing in the hallway was a woman named Laura. She looked exhausted, her eyes wide with a mixture of desperation, anger, and profound sadness. She had been searching for him, and the toll of that search was written across her face. "Laura?" Jack asked, his voice dropping into a harsh, hushed whisper as he stepped closer to her, his previous charm completely vanishing. "For Pete's sakes, what are you doing here?" "I waited for you to come back for 6 weeks," Laura said, her voice trembling with emotion as she stepped into his personal space. "I told you to stay in San Diego, Frank. You know how dangerous it is for me up here." "What about me?" Laura countered, her eyes welling with tears. "I was going crazy. At least you could have done what is called once in all that time, Frank." Jack glanced nervously over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the hallway. "Oh, I am being watched," he whispered urgently, grabbing her arm gently but firmly. "Act like you do not know me." "Who?" Laura asked, looking around in confusion. "The guy on the other side of the hallway, the one with a cigar," Jack lied smoothly, creating a fictional thread out of thin air to regain control of the situation. "He is one of them." "Oh, Frank, if you are trying to tell me that he—" Laura started, her voice filled with exhaustion. "Come on, let us get out of here," Jack interrupted, pulling her down the corridor. "We are going to have all the exits covered. We are going to have to figure another way to get out of here." "Oh, Frank, please, no more lies," Laura pleaded, stopping in her tracks and pulling her arm away. She looked at him with a profound sense of betrayal. "What lies?" Jack asked, turning to her with a face that perfectly mirrored wounded innocence. "Come on, Laura. You said you loved me. You said you wanted to marry me." "And I do want to marry you," Laura cried softly. "More than anything else in this world. But you are lying again. And all those stories about having to pay off some gambler. My God, I helped you rob my own company because you said they would kill you if you did not pay them off." "That is right," Jack insisted, his voice intense as he maintained the deception. "And I still owe them $50,000. The diamonds that we took were—" "Stop it," Laura interrupted, shaking her head as tears began to stream down her cheeks. "There were no gambling debts. You pulled the robbery, you and your friends, for yourselves. Is that what you really think?" Jack asked, his voice dropping to a soft, hurt whisper. "What do you want me to think?" Laura asked, her voice cracking. "You just left me. You never called." "I just did not want you to get mixed up in all of this," Jack explained, reaching out to cup her face in a display of false affection. "I could not let them know where you were. Do not you see that? What do you think I would have done if they had grabbed you?" Laura looked at him, her defenses crumbling under his intense gaze. "Is that true, Frank?" "Laura, yes," Jack said, seizing the opportunity. Look, I am not perfect. I got faults. But I have always been honest with you. And down there, all right. Look, I have got an idea. I will go first and lead them off. Wait 10 minutes, and you follow. I will meet you later at your place. No, I am going with you, Laura insisted, terror gripping her at the thought of losing him again. Laura, I told you, that is not safe, Jack said, his tone growing sterner. Look, either I go with you or I call the police, Laura threatened weakly, using the only leverage she thought she had left to keep him close. Jack stared at her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly as a cold determination settled deep within him. You call the police, he thought to himself, but aloud he maintained his calm facade. I love you, Frank, Laura whispered, her voice filled with a tragic devotion. I have already proven that. You should not have come up here, Laura, Jack said quietly, his voice devoid of the warmth it had held moments before. You should have stayed in San Diego. 10 minutes later, Jack walked back into the main lounge, his expression completely transformed back into the bright, cheerful demeanor of a carefree bachelor. He approached the table where the young woman from the pharmaceutical company was still waiting patiently for him. Sorry it took so long, Jack said smoothly as he slid back into his seat. Well, Alf, tell me that you are a secretary. The young woman laughed, shaking her head. Administrative assistant, she corrected him gently. At a pharmaceutical company. 1 out of 2 is not bad, Jack joked, offering her a brilliant smile. At Norlam Pharmaceuticals? She nodded. Interesting work, Jane, she said, introducing herself properly. Jane? Jack asked, raising an eyebrow. And, she clarified with a chuckle. And Hobson. Yes, it is very interesting. Well, tell me, Miss and Hobson, Jack said, leaning in closer, have you had dinner tonight? No, Anne replied, looking at him with growing interest. Well, that is good, Jack said, his voice dropping to a warm, inviting register. Because I know a very nice, very quiet little restaurant where the scampi is terrific. Okay? And smiled, unable to resist his charm. Okay, she agreed. Why not? A few days later, in a quiet, professionally appointed office across town, an elderly gentleman with silver hair and a sharp, discerning gaze sat behind a large desk. His name was Barnaby Jones, a highly respected private investigator known for his meticulous methods and unwavering dedication to the truth. Sitting across from him was Miss Andrews, a woman whose face was clouded with deep sorrow and unresolved grief. Your sister was a very handsome woman, Miss Andrews, Barnaby said gently, his voice carrying a comforting weight. She was also a very strong woman, Mr. Jones, Miss Andrews replied, her voice steady despite the pain she was feeling.
Please sit down.
Thank you, Barnaby said, settling into his chair. You know, sometimes we have difficulty in accepting things from people, especially people that we love. No, Miss Andrews said firmly, shaking her head. I will not accept suicide, Mr. Jones. If I did, I would also have to accept the blame for driving Laura to the hospital. You and your sister did not get along? Barnaby asked, leaning forward to listen intently. Of course we did, Miss Andrews insisted. Until she quit her job and ran off to San Diego to marry that man, there was never a harsh word between us. You did not approve of the man? Barnaby inquired. There was nothing to approve or disapprove about Frank, she explained, looking down at her hands. I never even met him. It was just the way she suddenly up and ran off with a perfect stranger, a man who picked her up in a bar. I did not approve of that. The newspapers never mentioned a husband, Barnaby noted, recalling the case files he had reviewed. It is because they were never married, Miss Andrews said bitterly. All I could get Laura to say when she came home was that he left her there in San Diego.
Did she say why?
Barnaby asked. Well, she was only home for 2 days before she died, Miss Andrews recalled, her voice dropping to a whisper. She would not talk about it at all. Well, maybe this Frank could give us some kind of an idea of her mental state, Barnaby suggested thoughtfully. I thought so, Miss Andrews agreed. I thought so too. But I do not know how to look for him. I do not even know his last name. Well, maybe we could find out from the motel they stayed in, Barnaby said, searching for a starting point. Which one was it? I do not know, she replied, looking frustrated.
Wait.
There was a picture on the postcard that she sent when she first came down there. She reached into her purse and pulled out a creased piece of cardboard, handing it across the desk to the investigator. Barnaby took the postcard and examined it closely under his desk lamp. His eyes narrowed as he noticed a clean, straight edge where a portion of the card had been removed. Looks as though someone has cut off the name of the motel